Welcome to the Tuesday Huddle, a brief reflection on Sunday's message at Walnut Hill Church in Lexington, Kentucky. Each week, we revisit the heart of the sermon and consider how God's Word meets us in the days ahead. Thanks for listening. Let's continue the conversation.
Well, hello there, and happy Monday to you. It is March the 2nd, 2026.
It is. We're into
We
March.
have entered the new month. I'm looking forward to spring on a day like today.
Yeah, what's funny, and I feel like relevant to you, of course, is I asked someone yesterday, when does March Madness start? And do you know what the response was?
March?
But really, what day does it officially start?
I don't know the official day. It goes into April.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, conference tournaments are still like a couple weeks away.
Well, I just wanted to put that in there for our sports people. I'm clearly not one of them.
I have really tried to reduce my sports conversation.
Really?
And think about my sermons. When's the last time I talked about sports?
Oh, man, I missed this. I
Well,
love the Olympic
Okay.
people you referenced. And
Right.
sorry, I have a very needy dog pawing at me right now.
Sorry.
But no, I enjoyed them.
Well, maybe I can bake them back in. Anyway, hope you're doing well, Jesse.
Yes, you too?
My name is Sean. You're on Walnut Hill, and we are studying John chapter 10,
Yes, we are.
verses 11 through 18. If you have not yet worshiped with us, as we always say, if you'll go back to our Facebook page or to our church website and worship with us and then rejoin this video. Actually, it's not a video,
No, it's a podcast now.
it's just an audio. I wonder if people miss my smiling face. I've heard no complaints.
I was going to say, I hope they say no, because then that means I have to do more prep in the morning.
Or it is actually easier not being on video.
It's so much easier.
You can, you don't have to worry about your posture.
Right.
Although your posture is important for speaking,
That is
which
true.
I'm learning.
Oh, should I
the older
flip
I get.
straight?
Actually, too.
Was that a cue?
Nope, not at all. So anyway, hey, let's dig right in. So we are working through the I am statements of Jesus Christ. And last week we started with I am the gate. And one of the things that we noted yesterday was that Jesus, when he makes these statements, they're not just isolated, kind of random, like out of the blue. He's typically dealing with a certain situation. And so I just mentioned yesterday, to those who are spiritually hungry, he would say, I'm the bread of life. To those who are in spiritual darkness, I am the light of the world. To those who are in need of shelter from the storm, I am the gate or the door. For those who are feeling the sting of grief and loss and death, I am the resurrection and the life. So let me ask you a question, Jesse.
Sure.
Understanding that he says, I am the good shepherd, what would be the condition or the situation that would call for a good shepherd in your life?
Do you mean metaphorically or?
I'm thinking, because again, we're thinking metaphorically, it's, spiritually hungry, bread of life,
Right.
So what would be the condition that would cause you to say, I need a shepherd?
I think for me, it would be protection.
Okay.
And one thing I wanted to talk about today is that it's not just any shepherd. It's a good shepherd. And what that means, because I think he could have said anything. He could have just said, I am the shepherd. He could have said, I am the watchful shepherd.
Right.
I am the peaceful shepherd. He chose, I am the good, which you talk about later in the sermon, gives us so much confidence and hope.
Yeah, I want to do good.
Yeah.
Because he does, obviously, he's addressing the Pharisees who are not seen as good shepherds. And then we noted the image of the shepherd. Of course, we have the Psalm from David, the Lord is my shepherd. But then also from Ezekiel, which was probably 400 years later, where he really talks about the shepherds of God's people being corrupt. And he says, in fact, I'll just read to you from Ezekiel chapter 34. You feed yourselves rather than feeding the flock. So these are shepherds who are looking out for number one. So they're not faithful to the flock. You haven't strengthened the weak. You haven't healed the sick. You haven't bound up the broken, brought back the lost. You are not true shepherds. And because of that, the people are scattered. And so he lays out, hey, there are shepherds out there who are not good.
Right. And I think he's doing that so we are aware and look out for that, because it's almost like he's saying there's going to be imposters.
Right. Who don't care about the flock.
Right. But who might act like they do. And so it's good that he delineates exactly what a good shepherd means to him.
Over the years, as a pastor, I've been called a shepherd, and I always, I don't bristle at that, but I don't embrace that.
Why not?
Well, I think that we have a good shepherd in Jesus Christ. I'm more like a sheepdog.
You're just rounding them
I'm
up.
rounding them up, but I am not
fair.
the one. I mean, And so I've always thought, it's my job to keep pointing people to the shepherd, but not to be the shepherd.
Actually, I think that's a really good analogy,
Thank you.
right? Because you guys work in partnership and you round them up for the shepherd, and then the shepherd takes care of them ultimately.
Right. My greatest desire is for people to know the shepherd,
Yes.
not to care about who the sheepdog is. After a sermon, what I love to hear is not, hey, that was a great sermon, but I love to hear, don't we have a great God?
Yeah,
Worship. And so
absolutely.
that people are focused on that and not on who's delivering the sermon. So, yeah, he does call himself the good shepherd, and he's drawing that contrast. Of course, God even refers to himself as a shepherd later in Ezekiel chapter 34. He just says, I'll search for my sheep as a shepherd. And so, again, that is a common image. So then we kind of launched into, first of all, again, the definite article, I am the good shepherd, not a good shepherd. So it sounds pretty exclusive. And I think a lot of 21st century ears hear this and they're like, ooh, that sounds pretty narrow and pretty restrictive and exclusive. How did your ears hear that?
I think if you read just the first verse, but if you continue on, as you pointed out, he eventually says, everyone. I'm going to round up everyone, and paraphrasing, of course, but it's people you might not even think I would,
Mm,
which is so telling and so important. And you also mentioned that this is coming on the heels of his interaction with two people, a woman who had committed adultery and a
right.
man who was blind, deaf, and dumb. And so he's just been with these people who the Pharisees would normally see as nobodies. They don't
Right.
matter. They've done bad things. So right on the heels of that, he's coming in and telling us, yeah, they're going to come too.
Yeah, it's one of those paradoxes of scripture that we even talked about on Sunday, that those people for whom the world has no respect or no use, who are seen as worthless or without value, are the very people that God sees as treasures worth sacrificing for. And so I think for us, that is a call to realize, hey, everyone I encounter is redeemable.
Yes, but I
Valuable.
also, when I was listening to the sermon again this morning, I think it's also a call for us to do the same in our lives
What I mean?
because
Yeah.
no one's irredeemable. But I think with the way culture is set up, there is a hierarchy, even if
Right.
it's not as drastic as it is in countries like India. But there is a hierarchy. We look at people who have less money or maybe less connections as kind of lower beneath us. And I think here he's asking us to really check ourselves on that too.
I think so too. Have you ever had that feeling that you are viewed as not as valuable as the people around you? Have you ever had a moment where you're like, I am sort of feeling like I'm sort of insignificant here?
Yeah, like, all the time.
You really?
I think everyone feels that way. I think people in their jobs and their families, depending on, where you're at in the family order, it's easy to feel that way. So, yeah, I just think it's really relatable,
Hmm.
but definitely a lookout for all of us.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
The gospel is really geared toward those who are seen as worthless, which I think is amazing. Of course, then he refers to us as sheep. And as we noted yesterday, the idea of being a sheep is not very flattering,
No.
kind of clumsy.
I was referred to be something a little cleaner personally.
I
They're
know.
very dirty
Yeah, I don't know.
animals.
Especially goats. I'm not a big fan of goats. I once had a goat that, in fact, his name was Kip, Kip, at this camp where I worked. And Kip smelled so bad, you could hear the smell.
Oh, wow, that's
It's the weirdest thing. You could almost hear the smell on Kip.
yikes.
I know. Anyway, so sheep are not the most flattering, and they're pretty helpless
Mm,
without a shepherd. They're just a meal.
yes.
Now, you're probably more comfortable in a large city than I am. My illustration about being helpless
I
and
have
my
to
wife
say.
being my shepherd. I always feel really helpless without my shepherd when I'm in a large city. So that's the image of being a sheep. And then we see this contrast. What makes him the good shepherd is that the hired hand just doesn't care about the sheep. And when the wolf comes, the hired hand skedaddles. In the Old Testament, there's this wonderful passage where David is talking about being a shepherd and he's getting ready to go into battle against Goliath the giant. And David says, listen, I killed the bear and I killed the lion. I'm ready for the giant. And this idea that he was a good shepherd to that flock by protecting them in those instances.
I love that, and if you jump forward when he say they leave when the wolf comes, but
Mhm.
then in 27 and 28 9.
Ooh, so we're moving ahead in
Yeah,
chapter
I'm moving a little. I'm doing a little outside the sermon. He says,
Good.
"What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of the Father's hands." I think he's reminding us again, evil is going to come, bad
Right.
things will come, but I'll still be here and I won't let you go.
It makes me wonder, eh, and this is maybe a little bit of a kind of a theological egghead kind of debate or conversation, but when I read that, I start thinking about, can you have a relationship with God and somehow lose that and lose your eternal security? And that's been a real debate historically within the church. There are some branches of the church family tree that say, once you have been redeemed by God and claimed by God, there is nothing that can take you away.
Right.
There are others in the family tree who would say, well, if you turn from God and do your own thing, then yeah, you can kind of lose all that. I tend to be in the former camp where I just believe if you truly have entered into this relationship, we're human beings, we're sheep. We're going to
Right.
have these moments, but that ultimately no one is going to snatch us from the Father's hand.
It's very reassuring.
Of course, verse 30, I and the Father are one.
Yes, and so we talked about
That's
that
that
last
claim.
week. We mentioned that some people think in the Bible there's not a passage where Jesus really says, "I am God," but that seems pretty clear. So what would you make of that?
Very much so.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of times he uses language where he kind of conceals that a little bit.
Mm,
And I think he wants his actions to speak louder than his words. I believe my eyes, not my ears sometimes. But obviously, John was thoroughly convinced that Jesus was indeed the Son of God and that was at one with the Father. So, what makes him a good shepherd is that he lays down his life for the sheep. Unheard of in that day. Insane. Why would a shepherd die for even one lamb?
right.
I mean, but he's clearly says that's what I'm going to do. And then I even use the example of David, going back to him, that he sacrificed someone in order to protect his own reputation.
For the sin of adultery, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so it wasn't even for a good reason.
David and Bathsheba, there's the sin of adultery. And then David wants Bathsheba's pregnancy to be hidden by having her husband come in from battle. His name was Uriah. And he comes in from battle. There's no conception there. And so he has him killed.
Yeah.
I mean, basically what he did was he said to the commander of that company in the military, hey, just put your eye in a place where he's not going to make it. So
Right.
David, who is seen as the great shepherd,
Yes.
not only as a shepherd over a flock, but over God's people too, did that very thing. And now we have Jesus Christ who says, I'm going to sacrifice my life for you.
That's kind of hard to wrestle with that David did that and is still seen as a great figure. So tell me, because I'm not really sure, how does he reconcile?
He confesses. So we read from Psalm 32 yesterday. So if you're at home and you get a chance to read Psalm 32, it's David's amazing confession to God, where he basically says, when I tried to cover my sin for myself and tried to conceal it, literally my body wasted away.
That's right. You were saying, I think last week you said my body moans and aches, or that was in our,
Right. Through my
yeah,
groaning day
our
and
current
night.
confession.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he said, but when I confessed my sin, God was faithful and just. Now, the caveat is that there were still human consequences to that.
Right.
And if you read the story of the child conceived, a tragic story. So don't want to go into too much detail, but there are consequences to our human sin. I mean, even though we're eternally secure with God and we're forgiven, we live in a world where that just is the way it's set up. But for me, that gives both humility and confidence. And we noted that yesterday. At every stage of life, I think we just need to be humble. I can think of moments when I have not been humble and I need to look in the mirror and just say, you are a sheep.
Mhm.
And what I said yesterday was, even after being known by the shepherd, being called by name by the sheep still remain sheep. That status does not change. What I then wanted to launch into, and I thought, at least for me, was pretty powerful, was it also gives confidence. And so we looked at verses 17 and 18. He says, no one takes my life from me, which I'm going to lay it down on my own accord. That's a reference to the cross. So the cross was not some kind of bizarre surprise.
Mm.
It was expected. And I tried to say yesterday, I just wonder how many times he was just kind of walking along and saw crucifixions and thought, man,
That really made me think because when I think of the crucifixion, you almost think of it as though this is the only time it happened. It was so horrific. This is, but you're right. I mean, it would have been part of the culture and he would have seen it. And so, what does that do to that scene in the Bible? I mean, he's raised up on a cross like a common thief.
he is
Yeah,
in between a couple of them.
exactly. So, is it another nod to his humanity, you think, or just humbling?
Yeah, I would say so. As I'm processing that as you're asking that question. I mean, in my mind, he was fully human. He became one of us, and so he can identify with us, but he was also fully divine. Yeah, I think that he was like, I am going to show you that I am completely human. Here I am. I'm on this cross.
Right, and so he doesn't even die in a godlike way,
No.
right? Or something we would expect of God. It's very
Exactly.
common.
Very common and very brutal.
Yes.
Yeah. He's saying, hey, this is going to happen. It's not a surprise to me. But then he also says, I can take my life up again. And of course, I think that's a reference to the resurrection.
Yes.
So I see all this as, I am a firm believer in the sovereignty of God. In other words, that God is over this creation, that God is a story that God is writing, and that we have some free will within that story as we play out our parts as characters in this great drama. But ultimately, the script has been written by God, and I just need to learn to trust that. And so the word confidence came up for me as I thought about that.
And you mentioned imposter syndrome, which I love whenever someone brings that up because
Really?
I get to trot out that everyone should watch Amy Cuddy's Your Body Language May Share More About Who You Are, 76 million views. It was a TED Talk.
Okay.
And she talks about imposter syndrome is just a great thing to watch. But it also made me think in this context where he's saying, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Have you ever talked to someone and they're saying, I'm worried about what this person thinks? It's kind of a little bit of that imposter syndrome. They want to present this front and are worried people might see something different.
Mhm.
I had that conversation with a friend the other day, and I kind of said, because I've had to learn this and it's been really difficult, but I said, God knows who you are.
Right. Audience of one.
So does it matter what they think?
It's hard, isn't it? Because we want validation from other people, and yet we can't get ultimate validation from them. You have
No.
to trust that that comes from God.
Again, it's, I know who you are. It kind of doesn't matter what other people think or might say.
That's a tough one for me. It's a tough needle to thread because on the one hand, I depend on the validation of other people. I didn't knock on the door of this church and say, hey, I'm your new pastor.
Right.
It had to be validated by the people who are making that decision.
Well, yes, but then I think you have to ask how much part did God have in that decision?
And that's
Yeah.
where you have to lean on him and say, okay, this is your doing here.
Right.
Amy Cuddy, how do you spell the last name?
Cuddy.
I want to watch
It's
that.
great. She was a professor at Harvard Business for a while, but now I think she's an author and
Right.
just really powerful message.
I like those TED Talks.
I love them.
I even alluded to the Harvard Business Review. That's where I found that article about
that. Yep.
Burger King.
Oh yeah. Hey, I thought
Nobody laughed at that.
I thought
If you have a
that.
beef with Burger King,
I thought it was hilarious.
well,
I thought maybe they thought because it's off brand because Wendy's was the where's the beef,
maybe so.
but I still thought it was funny. Darn it.
It was one of those Sundays yesterday where I looked out and I was like, sometimes you just feel really energized. I just didn't feel energized yesterday.
Yeah, everyone has those days.
Yeah, I just had one of those days. And, we all, as a pastor, just like any other person, you bring your life to your work. And I was fatigued yesterday morning and I felt that and distracted a little bit, but the congregation was gracious as always. Well, we concluded with a note of unity when he says, I have other sheep who are not of this pen or flock. I believe that's a reference to the Gentiles, which in those days would have been just anathema. That wouldn't happen. And I think what he was saying is, hey, listen, someday there's going to be one flock and one shepherd, and I am that person. And so if you are talking with someone who is of a religious faith that would not embrace that, and the world is filled with folks who have different faiths, how do you talk about the fact that, no, actually God wants you in God's flock, and the way to enter that flock is through this one shepherd? And that's a tough one.
That is a tough one
So,
because
for me, that's a hard one.
then it starts feeling exclusive. You're right.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you?
I believe that there'll come a day when it's apparent.
Mm.
And so our job in the here and now is, we talk about thy kingdom come, that we are working toward God's kingdom coming. It's not here yet. But I believe there'll come a moment when God's kingdom does come where people are going to recognize this is the God of the universe who is now embracing me and taking me into eternity with that God. And that's what I rely on, that God's somehow going to make it apparent.
Right. And I took it a totally different way.
Good. You're probably right.
Well, no, I'm the least educated in the room here.
No.
So I took it more as other people, again, who you might not think would be in my fold. I'm still reaching out to them. And some religions would say this person can't be saved if they didn't do ...
Mm.
But I think Jesus is kind of opening up that salvation to pretty much everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
saying it applies to everyone, not just people who are here right now
Mhm.
in the flock.
Yeah.
There can be salvation for
Right.
others as well.
But it's through him.
It is through him.
So that's the struggle
Yes.
that folks have is, well, yeah, I believe salvation is for everyone, but not through Jesus.
Right.
Oh, it's the eternal debate. When I was first ordained as a minister, I was being examined to be ordained, actually. And I was in front of this huge group of people. And I was asked by the person examining me, you're standing there, you're just bearing your soul. What's the hardest thing about being a Christian for you? And it was this very thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I had encountered people of other faiths. And so that was hard. But I have gone ahead and staked my life on it.
So then the question comes, what if those people haven't been exposed to it? What if some remote tribe in the Amazon and they've
Right.
just never been exposed?
Well, yeah, I just have to believe that they'll have that opportunity at some point in the afterlife, I suppose, where there's just this exposure to, hey, this is who I am. And so I don't think you can hold them responsible. And the church has tried to wrestle with that. They talk about the age of accountability, a child dies and all this kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I'm okay with embracing mystery and just uncertainty. And just, for me, that's just faith and trust. And put it this way, if my tiny walnut-sized brain can explain all the mysteries of God, God is not nearly as great as I thought he was. So
Well,
that's kind of where I fall.
it's funny when you said I embrace the mystery, I do think it's almost synonymous with faith.
Yeah.
No.
Good chat, good talk. Hey, everyone. Well, I guess I should ask you any last
No, I think
thoughts or words?
Annie is here almost in my lap.
The
I think she's
dog
telling
is
us
saying
it's
it's
time to go.
in time. So, hey, thank you to everyone who's given us 25 minutes of your time. Hey, Revelation chapter 1 next week. I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn here, and we're going to talk about Jesus as the Alpha and the Omega. So, you have a wonderful week. You take good care, and goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Tuesday Huddle. If Sunday's message encouraged you, we invite you to watch the full service or explore more at walnuthillchurchky.org. Join us this week and next Sunday as we continue to grow together in faith.